Taking another look at the state of our water supply. As a reminder, our water primarily comes from wintertime snowpack in the Colorado Rockies, and we had a below average snowfall this time around. So it may not be a surprise to you that the elevation at Lake Mead is relatively low for this time of year.
Lake Mead is the largest reservoir in the United States, and at its peak in 1983, it stored an astonishing 28.9 million acre-feet of water, enough to blanket the entire state of Pennsylvania under a foot of water, with billions of gallons still remaining. For decades, it was the lifeline of the American Southwest. It fueled the explosive growth of Las Vegas from a small railroad stop into a city of nearly 3 million people. It supplied Phoenix as it expanded into one of America's largest cities, and it transformed California's Imperial Valley into one of the continent's most productive farming regions. Today, that picture has changed dramatically. Lake Mead now holds only about 1/3 of its original capacity. Towering above the water is a massive white band stretching across the canyon walls, known as the Bathtub Ring. It rises roughly 175 feet above today's shoreline, serving as a striking reminder of how far the reservoir has fallen. But that white ring isn't just a stain left behind by receding water, it's a warning. Many people blame Lake Mead's decline on drought, climate change, population growth, or excessive water use. While all of those factors have played a role, they don't tell the whole story. The real problem began more than a century ago. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this documentary, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into history, engineering, and the world's biggest mysteries. In 1922, 7 western states and the U.S. government signed the Colorado River Compact, an agreement that divided the river's water among the states. The plan assumed the Colorado River delivered 17.5 million acre-feet of water every year. But there was one major flaw. That estimate came from an unusually wet period. Modern research shows the river's long-term average flow is closer to 13 million acre-feet annually, leaving a shortfall of more than 4 million acre-feet every year. For over 100 years, that gap was quietly covered by 2 giant reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell. They acted like savings accounts, storing extra water during wet years to make up for the shortages. Now those reserves are disappearing. Water experts warn that the system is approaching critical levels it was never designed to face. If Lake Mead drops too low, it could threaten both hydroelectric power generation and water deliveries across the Southwest. That is why cities like Las Vegas have already invested billions of dollars in backup infrastructure, preparing for a future that many experts believe is no longer hypothetical. To understand why Lake Mead has become one of America's most vulnerable pieces of infrastructure, we have to go back to where it all began. On November 24, 1922, leaders from 7 states met at Bishop's Lodge in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with Herbert Hoover, then Secretary of Commerce, leading the negotiations. Their goal wasn't simply to divide water, it was to prevent a real conflict. At the time, California was rapidly expanding its irrigation projects, while neighboring states feared losing access to the Colorado River. Tensions became so serious that political leaders openly discussed using force before the federal government stepped in. The result was the Colorado River Compact, a historic agreement that permanently divided the river between the Upper Basin and Lower Basin states. Everything depended on one crucial question: how much water did the Colorado River actually produce? Using flow records from 1899 to 1921, engineers estimated the river carried about 17.5 million acre-feet each year. That number became the foundation for every major water project that followed. But decades later, scientists studying ancient tree rings discovered something extraordinary. Those years weren't normal at all. They represented one of the wettest periods in more than 1,200 years. In other words, the modern Southwest was built on water that the river was never capable of supplying over the long term. And today, Lake Mead is paying the price. To understand why Lake Mead is shrinking, scientists looked far beyond modern records. By studying the growth rings of ancient trees, they reconstructed the Colorado River's flow all the way back to around 800 AD. What they discovered changed everything. The years used to create the 1922 Colorado River Compact were not typical. They were among the wettest periods in more than 1,200 years. In other words, the river was carrying far more water than it normally does. While the compact assumed the Colorado River produced 17.5 million acre-feet each year, the long-term average is much closer to 13 million acre-feet. That means the agreement promised roughly 4.5 million acre-feet more water every year than the river could reliably provide. Even in 1922, some engineers questioned the calculations. They warned that the data covered too short a period and might not represent the river's true long-term behavior. But those concerns were set aside. The western states needed water, the federal government wanted stability, and the agreement moved forward. To bridge the gap, the United States built one of its greatest engineering achievements, Hoover Dam, completed in 1936. Behind it, Lake Mead became a giant reserve, storing water during wet years and releasing it during dry ones. For decades, the system worked exactly as planned. Cities expanded, farmland flourished, and the Southwest continued to grow. Everything seemed secure. By 1983, Lake Mead reached its highest level ever, holding 28.9 million acre-feet of water at an elevation of 1,225 feet. But that would become its high water mark. Around 2000, the reservoir began a long and steady decline. Year after year, the water level dropped. By 2010, it had fallen below 1,100 feet. By 2021, the federal government declared the first official Colorado River water shortage, triggering mandatory cuts for Arizona and Nevada. As conditions worsened, scientists changed the way they described the crisis. They stopped calling it a drought. Instead, they began using a new word: aridification. That distinction is critical. A drought is temporary. Rain eventually returns, snowpack recovers, and reservoirs refill. Aridification is different. It means the climate itself is becoming permanently drier, creating a new normal rather than a short-term emergency. Today, many researchers believe the Southwest is no longer waiting for the drought to end. It is adapting to a future with less water, and nowhere is that reality more visible than at Lake Mead. The massive white bathtub ring surrounding the reservoir isn't just a mark on the canyon walls. It's a record of how far the water has fallen, nearly 175 feet, and a powerful reminder of a system that can no longer keep up with the demands placed upon it. Lake Mead's shrinking water level is no longer just an environmental concern, it's becoming an infrastructure emergency. The reason lies in the design of Hoover Dam, which serves two critical purposes: generating electricity and delivering water to millions of people across the Southwest. Both depend on one thing: a high enough water level. The first critical point is 950 feet above sea level. Below this elevation, The dam's hydroelectric turbines begin losing efficiency as water pressure drops. Power production declines, threatening electricity supplies for nearly 1.3 million people in Nevada, Arizona, and California. But an even greater danger lies ahead. At 895 feet, Lake Mead reaches what's known as dead pool. At that level, gravity can no longer move water through Hoover Dam. Hydroelectric generation stops, and water deliveries downstream could come to a halt. Although the Colorado River would still flow into the reservoir, it could no longer flow out through the dam's existing outlets. The result would be devastating for the cities, farms, and communities that rely on the river every day. Today, Lake Mead remains only about 50 to 60 feet above dead pool. That may sound like a safe margin, but in years with poor snowpack, extreme heat, and continued overuse, the reservoir can lose 20 feet or more in a single year. Adding to the problem, nearly 600,000 acre-feet of water disappear annually through evaporation alone. Because of these risks, federal water managers are already preparing for scenarios that once seemed impossible. No city recognized the danger sooner than Las Vegas. Nearly 90% of its drinking water comes from Lake Mead. If the lake dropped below the original intake pipes, the city could lose access to its primary water supply, even if water still remained in the reservoir. To prepare for that possibility, the Southern Nevada Water Authority launched one of the region's most ambitious engineering projects. In 2008, construction began on the third straw, a massive intake tunnel built deeper beneath Lake Mead than any previous system. The project took 7 years to complete and cost nearly $1.5 billion. It wasn't built because the system had already failed. It was built because engineers feared one day it might. The project demanded engineers accomplish what many believed was nearly impossible. Crews had to drill through solid rock beneath the lake at crushing underwater depths, working under immense pressure while pushing modern construction technology to its limits. After years of planning and construction, the third intake, commonly known as the third straw, was completed in 2015. Its intake rests nearly 860 feet below the lake's surface, extending beneath the elevation known as dead pool. That design was intentional. If Lake Mead were ever to fall so low that Hoover Dam could no longer release water through its existing outlets, and even if every other customer connected to the reservoir lost access, Las Vegas would still be able to draw water through this emergency intake. The city invested nearly $1.5 billion in a backup system designed for a disaster officials insisted might never happen. That enormous investment speaks volumes. It reveals what the people closest to the crisis believed was possible, even if they rarely said it publicly. Phoenix does not have the option of building a similar escape route. Roughly 40% of Phoenix's water supply comes through the Central Arizona Project, better known as the Cape. This remarkable engineering system stretches approximately 336 miles, transporting Colorado River water from Lake Havasu, located downstream from Lake Mead, across hundreds of miles of desert before reaching central Arizona. The canal itself was one of the largest water projects ever undertaken in the United States. Construction cost approximately $4 billion at the time, equal to well over $10 billion in today's dollars. It remains among the most expensive water infrastructure projects in American history. Yet Arizona entered the Colorado River system with one major disadvantage. Unlike California, Arizona holds junior water rights. That status traces back to the negotiations surrounding the Colorado River Compact. Arizona delayed ratifying the agreement for years, while California continued expanding its use of the river. By the time Arizona officially joined, it accepted a lower priority in exchange for federal funding that made the Central Arizona Project possible. That compromise still shapes the Southwest today. Junior priority means exactly what it sounds like. Whenever the Colorado River cannot satisfy every user, Arizona loses water before many others. The consequences have already become reality. During the 2021 Tier 1 shortage declaration, Arizona's allocation was reduced by approximately 512,000 acre-feet, nearly 18% of its Colorado River supply. The following year brought an even deeper Tier 2A shortage, resulting in additional reductions. Phoenix has not ignored the warning signs. City officials have expanded groundwater storage, increased wastewater recycling, improved conservation programs, and encouraged residents to use less water. Those measures have helped, but they cannot change Arizona's legal position. As Lake Mead continues falling, Arizona remains one of the first states required to absorb the losses, and Lake Mead continues its decline. Far to the southwest, the Imperial Valley tells another side of the same story. By every natural measure, this part of California should be barren desert. Summer temperatures frequently climb above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Annual rainfall often totals only a few inches. Without imported water, farming here would be virtually impossible. Yet the valley has something many growing cities do not. It has water. The All-American Canal, stretching roughly 80 miles, carries Colorado River water from the Imperial Dam into the valley, supplying enough irrigation to support nearly 500,000 acres of farmland. That water transforms one of the hottest deserts in North America into one of its most productive agricultural regions. The Imperial Valley supplies a significant share of America's winter vegetables. Lettuce, broccoli, carrots, melons, produce that fills grocery store shelves across the country, while colder farming regions remain frozen. The valley enjoys another critical advantage. Its water rights are among the oldest on the Colorado River. Farmers claimed those rights long before Las Vegas became a major city, long before Phoenix expanded into a metropolitan area, even before the Colorado River Compact was signed. Because those rights carry senior priority, they are largely protected during shortages. When water becomes scarce, cities are often required to reduce consumption before the Imperial Valley does. That reality sits at the center of one of the Southwest's most controversial debates. Approximately 80% of all Colorado River water is used for agriculture. Among the crops requiring the greatest volume of water is alfalfa, a hay crop grown primarily as livestock feed. Large quantities of that alfalfa are exported overseas. Countries including Saudi Arabia, China, and others purchase hay grown with Colorado River water to feed their cattle and dairy herds. The same water capable of serving millions of people instead helps produce animal feed shipped around the world. From an economic perspective, many farmers are simply exercising valuable legal rights. Alfalfa remains profitable. Water rights are protected property rights. No laws are being broken. Yet the public perception has become increasingly difficult to ignore. Each year, Lake Mead drops a little farther. Las Vegas responds with tighter outdoor watering restrictions. Phoenix urges residents to shorten showers, reduce lawn irrigation, and conserve every possible gallon. Meanwhile, Colorado River water continues flowing into fields, producing hay destined for international markets. The contrast has fueled growing political tension. In 2024, the lower basin states reached a major conservation agreement, supported by federal funding through the Inflation Reduction Act. Billions of dollars were committed to reducing water consumption. Farmers received payments to temporarily leave fields unplanted. Cities obtained funding for conservation upgrades and efficiency improvements. Communities across the Southwest agreed to share part of the burden. But even those efforts cannot solve the underlying mathematical problem. The legal system continues promising approximately 17.5 million acre-feet of water each year. In reality, the Colorado River now delivers closer to 13 million acre-feet. For decades, Lake Mead has absorbed that difference. Now the reservoir itself is paying the price. The shoreline retreats farther every year. As the water disappears, it exposes pieces of history that had remained hidden beneath the surface for generations. Since 2020, record low water levels have revealed remarkable discoveries across the lake. Boats that sank during the 1980s and 1990s now rest on dry ground, their weathered hulls cracked beneath the relentless desert sun. Concrete intake towers that once stood deep underwater now rise visibly above the shrinking shoreline. Artifacts from earlier decades have emerged as reminders of a time when Lake Mead seemed limitless. The lake has revealed something else as well. Human remains. Multiple sets of remains have been discovered as the reservoir has receded. Some belonged to drowning victims, whose bodies were gradually buried beneath sediment over many years. Others raised far more disturbing questions. In May 2022, visitors near Hemingway Harbor spotted a rusted metal barrel protruding from the newly exposed lake bed. When authorities examined it, they made a grim discovery. Inside the barrel were human remains. As Lake Mead's water level continued to fall, it began revealing more than just rock and shoreline. In 2022, boaters near Hemingway Harbor discovered a barrel protruding from the newly exposed lake bed. Inside were human remains. Investigators believed the victim had died sometime during the 1970s or 1980s, and evidence suggested the death was the result of a gunshot wound. The barrel immediately reminded many of the methods once associated with organized crime during Las Vegas's mob era. It wasn't the last discovery. As the shoreline kept retreating, more human remains, abandoned boats, and long-forgotten objects emerged from beneath the water. What had been hidden for decades was suddenly returning to the surface. In many ways, these discoveries became a powerful symbol of the larger crisis. For generations, Lake Mead quietly concealed another problem, one far bigger than anything buried beneath its waters. The Colorado River was being asked to provide more water than it could naturally supply. Cities expanded, farms grew larger, and legal agreements continued promising water that the river simply didn't have. For decades, Lake Mead absorbed that difference. Lake Mead can no longer make up the difference. Many experts believe the reservoir may never return to the levels seen decades ago. As temperatures rise and Rocky Mountain snowpack continues to shrink, the Colorado River is expected to deliver even less water in the years ahead. That's why scientists now use the term aridification instead of drought, a long-term shift to a permanently drier climate. Today, Lake Mead sits only 50 to 60 feet above dead pool, the point where Hoover Dam could no longer release water downstream. In a single bad year, the lake can lose 20 feet or more, leaving far less margin than most people realize. Las Vegas has already prepared by building its third straw, but many other communities don't have that safety net. The reality is simple. For more than a century, the Colorado River Compact promised more water than the river could reliably provide, and Lake Mead quietly absorbed the shortage. Now, that buffer is disappearing. The growing white bathtub ring isn't just a mark on the canyon walls. It's a warning that time is running out for the American Southwest. More than 40 million people depend on this river, and what happens next will be determined not by hope, but by the reality of the water that's left. It will be decided by water, engineering, and mathematics.